Cost of hunger on the African continent estimated at between 3 and 16% of the annual gross domestic product. African countries challenged to move faster and unlock all the potential energy mix which lies untapped across the continent if Africa must meet the 10 gigawatts of electricity by 2020. Plus, Kaduna State government in the northwest Nigeria declares state of emergency on tomato owing to the outbreak of disease caused by a pest, Tuta absoluta. Hello and welcome to Business Incorporated live from Lagos. I'm Chimizi Obi Iwawo. Well, we'll begin with the Asian markets as Japanese shares lost ground as oil prices fell and the yen strengthened slightly against the dollar by the close of trade. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 index was down 0.9%. In China, the mainland Shanghai Composite Index closed 0.8% lower, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng ended flat at 19,830.43 points. South Korea's Kospi Index ended the trading day down 0.9%. In Australia, the ASX 200 closed 0.4% lower. And in Europe, the euro's weakness against the US dollar is pushing European stocks up. The fear of a possible rate hike in the US is also weighing on the European markets. Let's bring in Javier Arguedas, DWTV Channels TV correspondent, to talk us through this development. Good afternoon, Javier. While the fear of a possible rate hike in the US is weighing on the European markets, how are investors addressing the issue?
Well, when is that interest rate hike going to happen in the United States? Of course, everyone knows it's coming, but the question is that not everyone knows when. And that is why it is so difficult to bet on a possible rate hike in June or in July. Most experts agree that it's going to happen either in June or in July. The probabilities right now, as measured by some of the institutes and experts who try to address this, is 30% chances that it's going to happen in June and about 58% chances that it's going to happen in July. But it is very difficult because you still do not know what the last numbers of the U.S. economy are going to tell us. Now, recently we had some figures that were above expectations in the United States, and that basically triggered all those fears that an interest rate hike might be coming soon, affecting, of course, on the one hand, the performance of the United States economy, but also affecting the emerging countries, which, as we know, have been quite sensitive since the beginning of this year. So that's why investors are really a little bit undecided and trying to see where they put their money on.
Now, Javier, let's look at the bright side. The euro's weakness against the US dollar is pushing European stocks up. Can we expect this trend to continue?
Well, as long as we have the fears on a possible interest rate hike, as long as we keep seeing good numbers on the U.S. economy, that's probably going to up the price of the U.S. dollar, with the immediate effect, of course, of the euro going down. Now, depending on what other factors might be affecting the economy here in the eurozone, the thing is that, as we know, when the euro is weaker, it is good for the exporting companies because the products that they produce here in Europe in euros are, of course, cheaper to buy for foreign customers. That's the effect that I always describe to you, but it's important to keep that in mind. So that's why for today, for example, we are seeing the DAX quite strong, up more than 1%, despite the fact that we have these jitters on the U.S. interest rates, because at least it supports the exports here in Germany, and the same goes for many other of the Eurozone countries.
Right. Javier, this morning, Deutsche Bank had to cope with even more bad news. Tell us more about that.
Yes, that's perhaps the most worrying development this morning. The Moody's rating agency downgraded Deutsche Bank's credit rating once again. It's now only 2 levels above junk rating, which is, of course, quite worrying and especially disappointing for the new CEO, John Cryan, who took office about a year ago and is now, very recently, since this year's shareholder meeting, the sole CEO of the company. Everyone was expecting for new beginnings for Deutsche Bank, but this this is very far away from happening, not only because of the many different problems that Deutsche Bank has in their performance as they are restructuring, and that is, of course, always very expensive and difficult to fulfill, but also because the company has faced a lot of legal troubles that have been weighing on their financial performance. And as far as we know from now, new problems, new legal issues of Deutsche Bank allegedly playing a role in money laundering in Russia, for example, might head their way, making things even more difficult. So we are very far away from new beginnings, and that's very bad news for what used to be Germany's most prestigious financial institution.
Well, Javier, let's hope Deutsche Bank comes out of these troubles very soon. Thank you for your time. Do have a wonderful day. The cost of hunger on the African continent has been estimated at between 3 and 16% of the annual gross domestic product. That's according to a new research released on Monday by the Global Panel on Agriculture and Food Systems for Nutrition at the annual meetings of the African Development Bank in Lusaka, Zambia. The report says some 56 million, or 36% of children under the age of 5 are seriously undernourished, with the most impact in Ethiopia, Malawi, Rwanda, and Burkina Faso. 15 African countries, however, spend additional $83 billion to meet the target of the 2025 World Health Assembly. The national incomes of the countries are expected to jump. Nigeria is expected to add $29.3 billion to its national incomes if the new investments are made. Meanwhile, the president of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, has challenged African countries to move faster and unlock all the potential energy mix which lies untapped across the continent if Africa must meet the 10 gigawatts of electricity by 2020. One of the bank's high-five priority areas is Light Up and Power Africa. It also reflects the bank's New Deal on energy and the key resolutions from the recent UN climate talks on global warming. Now, what are the financing options for Africa's energy? Mr. Herbert Danso, CEO and Vice Chairman of Africa Investor, attended some of the sessions at the meeting and joins me now to look at the issues. Good afternoon, Mr. Danso.
Good afternoon to you, and good afternoon to everyone in Nigeria.
Right, good to have you on the program. Africa targets to meet 10 gigawatts of electricity by 2020. How achievable is this?
Well, I think if you just take the stock of the current access that we have or that we don't have, I mean, half of our population, as you know, don't have access to modern energy. That's almost 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's a big issue. And if you put it into context, Africa has, what, 13% of the world's population, 48% of the global population without access to electricity. So that's really a big issue to us. But I think if you look at, some of the other statistics out there, Africa Investors done some research, McKinsey have done some research, where we project that sub-Saharan Africa will consume nearly, 1,600 terawatt hours by 2040, which is 4 times what was used in 2010. So if you look at those issues, you see a lot of the demand side. But then when you look at the actual shortages, I mean, they're having such a significant and dramatic impact on our economic growth. It's suggested that the lack of power is diminishing our economic growth by 2 to 4% a year, which is more than some of the African nations' projected growth for 2016. So we've really got to boost up the investment that we're putting into the sector. And I think that's really an important point to make, because we're only currently investing about $8 billion a year, or sort of 0.4% of our gross domestic product. And we need a 10-fold increase in our power generation to achieve the UN universal access to energy goals by 2030, the ones that you're referring to. So if we just take stock and say that even if we continue to carry on at this current rate, we won't even sort of have any chance of achieving those specific universal access to energy goals until 2080. So we've really got to take stock about the critical actions that we need to put in terms of the level of investment and how we incentivize the investors to participate more.